The Voreth warship descended through the burning sky of New Geneva like a black dagger cutting through flesh. Kira Vance watched from the basement window of what had once been the central library, her green eyes reflecting the flames that consumed the city above. She was 12 years old, and she had just lost everything. 3 hours ago, her parents had been alive. Her father, Marcus Vance, had been the head engineer at the planetary defense grid. Her mother, Alina, had been a xenolinguist who had spent years trying to establish peaceful contact with the Voreth Empire. Both of them had believed that war could be avoided. Both of them had been wrong. The Voreth did not come to negotiate. They came to conquer. Their empire had stretched across 1,000 worlds, and humanity's small collection of colonies was just another meal for their endless hunger. When their fleet appeared in orbit, they had not bothered with warnings or demands. They had simply started firing. Kira had been at school when the first bombs fell. Her teacher, Mr. Brennan, had pushed her toward the emergency shelter, but the building had collapsed before she could reach it. She had crawled through rubble and smoke, guided by nothing but instinct and the desperate need to find her parents. When she reached her home, there was nothing left but a crater. She had not cried then. She had not cried when she saw the bodies in the streets. She had not cried when she heard the screams of people being hunted by Voreth ground troops. Something inside her had gone cold and hard, like iron being forged in fire. She had walked through the chaos with calm purpose, avoiding the alien soldiers, finding her way to this basement where a small group of survivors had gathered. There were 17 of them now, mostly children like herself, along with a few adults who had managed to escape the initial attack. An old man named Thomas who had been a janitor at the library, a young woman named Sarah who had been a nurse at the hospital, a former soldier named Cole who had lost his left arm in the bombing but refused to stop moving. Cole was talking now, his voice rough with pain and exhaustion. He was trying to organize them, trying to figure out a plan for survival. But Kira could see that he had no real answers. None of them did. The Voreth controlled the sky, the streets, and soon they would control everything else. "We need to get to the resistance," Cole was saying. "There are groups forming in the mountains. If we can make it out of the city, we might have a chance." "How?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "The Voreth have patrols everywhere. They have sensors, drones, and thermal scanners. We would not make it 3 blocks. Cole did not have an answer. Nobody did. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant sounds of explosions, and the crying of a small child named Emma who had not spoken since they found her wandering alone in the ruins. Kira stood up. She had been quiet until now, studying the old maps that Thomas had pulled from the library archives. Maps of the city, the sewer system, the underground tunnels that had been built centuries ago when the colony was first established. "There is a way," she said. Her voice was small, but something in its certainty made everyone turn to look at her. Cole frowned. "What do you mean, kid?" Kira spread the map on the floor. The Voreth thermal scanners are designed to detect body heat through buildings and vehicles, but they have a weakness. They cannot penetrate more than 10 meters of solid rock or dense material. She traced a line on the map with her finger. The old mining tunnels run under the entire city. They connect to the mountain passes on the eastern side. The tunnels are 20 meters deep in most places. Cole leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "How do you know about the scanner limitations?" "My father worked on the defense grid," Kira said, her voice steady despite the pain that flickered in her eyes. "He studied Voreth technology for years. He always said that understanding your enemy was the first step to defeating them." The adults exchanged glances. There was doubt in their faces, but also hope. It was the first real hope any of them had felt since the invasion began. "The tunnel entrance is 3 blocks east of here," Kira continued. "There is a maintenance access point in the old water treatment facility. The Voreth would not think to look there because it is not on any of the modern city maps. It was sealed off decades ago." "And you know how to unseal it?" Sarah asked. Kira nodded. My father took me there once. He said it was important to know all the hidden paths of your home. He said you never know when you might need them. Cole studied her for a long moment. He had been a soldier for 15 years, had fought in border skirmishes and pirate raids across a dozen systems. He had learned to judge people quickly, to recognize competence and courage when he saw it. This girl had both. "All right," he said finally. "We move at nightfall. Everyone gather what supplies you can carry. Water, food, medical kits, anything useful." He looked at Kira with something like respect. "You will lead us to the entrance. Can you do that?" Kira met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." The hours until nightfall passed slowly. Kira spent them studying the maps, memorizing every turn and junction, every possible route and alternative path. She had always been good at patterns, at seeing connections that others missed. Her teachers had called her gifted. Her parents had called her special. Now she would use those gifts for something more important than tests and grades. When darkness fell, they moved. Kira led the way, slipping through shadows and debris with silent precision. She had divided the group into smaller units, spacing them out to reduce the risk of detection. She had assigned specific roles to each person based on their abilities. Cole guarded the rear. Sarah stayed with the youngest children. Thomas carried extra supplies for those who could not manage their own. They moved through the ruined city like ghosts. Kira had calculated the patrol patterns of the Voreth soldiers based on the movements she had observed from the library window. She had identified blind spots in their coverage, moments when certain streets would be unwatched. Her timing was precise. Once they had to freeze in place as a Voreth drone passed overhead. The alien machine hummed with deadly purpose, its sensors sweeping the streets below. Kira had anticipated this. She had positioned the group in the shadow of a collapsed building where the rubble blocked the drone's view. They held their breath until it passed. They reached the water treatment facility just before midnight. The building was old and forgotten, half swallowed by vegetation and decay. Kira found the maintenance hatch exactly where her father had shown her. The lock was rusted but still functional. She worked it open with steady hands while the others kept watch. The tunnel below was dark and cold, smelling of earth and old water, but it was safe. It was their path to freedom. As Kira helped the last of the children down the ladder, she looked back at the burning city one final time. Somewhere out there, the Voreth were hunting for survivors. They would not find these ones. She climbed down into the darkness, pulling the hatch closed behind her. In that moment, she made a silent promise to her parents, to her city, to everyone who had been lost. The Voreth had taken everything from her. One day, she would take everything from them. The Resistance had just gained its most valuable member. 10 years passed like a slow, burning fire. Kira Vance grew from a desperate child into something far more dangerous. In the mountain camps of the Resistance, she learned everything she could about war, about the Voreth, about the weaknesses hidden within strength and the opportunities buried within defeat. The Resistance had started as scattered groups of survivors, hiding in caves and abandoned mines, fighting small battles against an overwhelming enemy. But over the years, it had grown. It had organized, and much of that organization had come from Kira. She had proven herself early. That first escape from New Geneva had saved 17 lives, but more importantly, it had shown the other survivors that victory was possible, that the Voreth could be outsmarted, outmaneuvered, defeated by those who thought differently than they expected. Kira had spent years studying the enemy. She had collected every piece of information about Voreth technology, tactics, and culture. She had interrogated captured soldiers, analyzed their equipment, learned their language. She understood them better than most Voreth understood themselves. The Voreth were hierarchical creatures. Their society was built on strict chains of command, rigid structures of authority and obedience. Individual initiative was discouraged. Questioning orders was punishable by death. This made them powerful in direct confrontation, where discipline and coordination mattered most, but it also made them predictable. Kira had exploited this predictability again and again. She had developed tactics that no Voreth commander would expect because no Voreth soldier would ever try them. Ambushes that appeared to be retreats, attacks that targeted logistics instead of troops, sabotage operations that turned the enemy's own technology against them. Now, at 22, she was the chief strategist of the resistance. Not its leader in name, though many treated her as one. The official leadership was a council of former military officers and civilian leaders who had survived the initial invasion. But when it came to planning operations, everyone looked to Kira. The council chamber was a natural cave deep within the mountains, lit by solar-powered lights and lined with communication equipment salvaged from destroyed cities. 12 people sat around a stone table, their faces showing various degrees of hope and exhaustion. General Harlan Reed, the highest-ranking military officer to survive the invasion, was speaking. He was a gray-haired man in his 60s, his body marked by old wounds and new scars. "The Voreth are building something in the Meridian Valley," he said, pointing to a holographic map. "Our scouts report massive construction activity. We believe it is a new command center for the occupation of this continent. If they complete it, they will have direct control over all their forces in this hemisphere," said Commander Lisa Chen, a former naval officer. "It will make coordinated resistance almost impossible." The room fell into worried silence. The Voreth had spent a decade consolidating their control over humanity's colonies. They had crushed every major organized military force. Only scattered resistance groups remained, fighting a guerrilla war that they were slowly losing. Kira studied the holographic map with intense focus. Her green eyes moved across the terrain, the enemy positions, the supply routes and defensive formations. She was seeing patterns, connections, possibilities that others could not perceive. "We cannot let them complete it," said Marcus Webb, a civilian leader who had organized resistance networks in the eastern settlements. "But how do we stop it? We do not have the forces for a direct assault." "A direct assault would be suicide," General Reed agreed. "The site is heavily defended. Ground troops, air support, automated defense systems. We would be destroyed before we got within a kilometer." Kira spoke for the first time. "We do not need a direct assault." Everyone turned to look at her. She was not an imposing figure, a young woman of average height with dark hair pulled back in a practical style. But her presence commanded attention in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. "The Voreth think in terms of force," she continued. "Attack and defense, strength against strength. They expect us to try to destroy the command center because that is what they would do. But destruction is not our only option." "What are you suggesting?" Commander Chen asked. Kira manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on specific features of the construction site. "The command center is designed to coordinate all Voreth military operations in this hemisphere. It will be connected to every unit, every ship, every drone in their network. That connectivity is their strength, but it is also their weakness." She highlighted a series of communication towers around the site. "If we could insert a virus into their command network, we could turn their own coordination against them. Instead of destroying the center, we could corrupt it, make it send false orders, conflicting commands, impossible instructions. Their entire military structure would collapse into chaos." General Reed stroked his chin thoughtfully. "It is a bold idea, but how would we deliver such a virus? Their cybersecurity is extremely sophisticated. We have never successfully penetrated their networks before." "That is because we have always tried to attack from outside," Kira said. "They are prepared for that, but their internal security is weaker. The Voreth trust their own people completely because their culture does not allow for betrayal or independent action." "You want to get someone inside?" Marcus Webb asked, his voice skeptical. How? Their biometric systems can identify humans instantly. Not someone, Kira said. Something. We have captured several Vorath maintenance drones over the years. If we could reprogram one and insert it into their supply chain, it could carry the virus directly into the command center's systems. The council members looked at each other with a mixture of hope and doubt. The plan was risky, complex, and required capabilities they had never demonstrated before. But it was also the first real chance they had seen to strike a significant blow against the occupation. Even if we could reprogram a drone, Commander Chen said carefully, we would need to know their supply routes, their authentication protocols, their internal network architecture. Do we have that information? Kira nodded slowly. We have some of it. The rest we can obtain. 3 weeks ago, we captured a Vorath logistics officer during a raid on a supply convoy. He has been resistant to interrogation, but I believe I can get the information we need. How? General Reed asked. A slight smile crossed Kira's face. By offering him something he wants more than loyalty to his empire. The meeting continued for several more hours as they discussed details and logistics, but the essential decision had been made. They would attempt Kira's plan. It was desperate and dangerous, but so was their entire existence. And for the first time in years, they had a strategy that could actually change the course of the war. Later that night, Kira visited the prisoner. The Vorath logistics officer was held in a secure cell carved from the mountain rock. His name was Veth, and he was young by Vorath standards, barely into his second century. He sat in the corner of his cell, his gray-scaled skin dull in the dim light, his 4 eyes watching her approach with a mixture of fear and defiance. I have not come to torture you, Kira said, sitting down on a stone bench outside the bars. I have come to offer you a choice. Veth made a sound that might have been a laugh. What choice can you offer? I am a prisoner. My fate is death or imprisonment. Perhaps, Kira said. Or perhaps not. I have studied your culture extensively. I know that you are of a minor clan, that your position in logistics was not earned through family connections, but through your own abilities. I know that your superiors take credit for your work, and that you will never advance beyond your current rank because of your birth. Veth's eyes narrowed. You know nothing about my people. I know that your empire is built on lies, Kira said quietly. The lie that hierarchy equals competence. The lie that obedience equals strength. I know that there are millions of Vorath like you, talented individuals trapped in a system that will never recognize their worth. And I know that some of those individuals are beginning to question whether the empire truly deserves their loyalty. She leaned forward. I am not asking you to betray your people, Veth. I am asking you to help build a different future, one where both our species can live freely. Help me, and when this war ends, you will have a place in that future. Refuse, and you will die here, forgotten by an empire that never valued you in the first place. Veth was silent for a long time. Kira could see the conflict in his expression, the battle between duty and desire, between the beliefs he had been taught and the truths he could not deny. Finally he spoke, What do you want to know? Kira allowed herself a small smile. The plan had just taken its first step toward success. The operation took 3 months to prepare. Kira oversaw every detail personally, from the reprogramming of the captured drone to the creation of the virus that would be its payload. She worked with the Resistance's best technicians, spending countless hours understanding Vorath code structures and network protocols. Veth proved invaluable. Once he committed to helping, he held nothing back. He provided detailed information about supply routes, authentication systems, and security procedures. He explained the internal politics of the Vorath military, identifying potential weaknesses in their command structure. And he helped design the virus itself, using his knowledge of their systems to create something that would be invisible until it was too late. The key is patience, Veth explained during one of their planning sessions. The virus should not act immediately. It should spread first, copying itself to every connected system, every ship, every ground unit. Only when it has reached everywhere should it activate. How long will that take? Kira asked. At least 48 hours after it enters the command center. Perhaps longer, depending on network traffic. Kira nodded thoughtfully. We will need to coordinate our forces. When the chaos begins, we must be ready to exploit it. This was the most challenging part of the plan. The resistance was spread across the continent in small cells, communicating through hidden channels and coded messages. Coordinating a simultaneous action would require precise timing and absolute secrecy. If the Voreth discovered their plans before the virus activated, everything would fail. Kira developed a communication system using encrypted signals hidden within normal radio traffic. Each cell received instructions without knowing the full scope of the operation. Only the Council knew the entire plan, and even they did not know all the details. Kira had learned that the fewer people who knew everything, the smaller the chance of betrayal or capture, revealing their intentions. The day of the insertion came on a cold morning in late autumn. A Voreth supply convoy was scheduled to pass through a narrow valley, carrying materials for the nearly completed command center. Among those materials would be a shipment of maintenance drones, fresh from a manufacturing facility in the east. The Resistance had prepared a careful ambush, not to destroy the convoy, but to briefly disable it long enough to swap one of the drones with their modified version. It was a delicate operation requiring split-second timing and absolute precision. Kira led the team herself. She could not ask others to take risks she would not share. Besides, she trusted her own judgment more than anyone else's in situations that required quick adaptation. They waited in the rocks above the valley road, covered in thermal camouflage that would hide them from Voreth sensors. The convoy appeared exactly on schedule, a line of heavy transport vehicles escorted by armed hover tanks. Kira counted them as they passed, waiting for the specific vehicle that Veth had identified. Third from the rear, she whispered into her communicator, "That is our target." At her signal, a hidden explosive detonated beneath the road ahead of the convoy. The blast was carefully calculated to be large enough to block the path, but not powerful enough to alert the Voreth to a serious attack. It would look like a mining accident, a leftover charge from the old excavation operations in this area. The convoy stopped. As Veth had predicted, the Voreth commander ordered his troops to secure the area while engineers cleared the debris. This left the transport vehicles temporarily less guarded. Kira and her team moved like shadows. They had precisely 4 minutes before the Voreth sensors would complete their sweep and detect any unusual activity. 4 minutes to reach the target vehicle, open its cargo compartment, locate the correct drone, swap it with their modified version, and escape. The first 3 minutes went perfectly. They reached the vehicle, bypassed its locks using codes that Veth had provided, and found the drone shipment exactly where it was supposed to be. The swap took 30 seconds. Then everything went wrong. A Voreth soldier appeared from behind the vehicle, apparently checking on the cargo during the delay. He saw Kira's team just as they were closing the compartment. For a frozen moment, everyone stared at each other. Kira moved first. She had trained for situations like this, prepared for the unexpected. She threw herself at the soldier before he could raise his weapon or call for help, driving a blade into the soft spot beneath his chin that Veth had identified as a vulnerability in Voreth anatomy. The soldier died silently, but his body fell against the vehicle with a loud clang that echoed through the valley. "Move," Kira ordered. They abandoned any attempt at stealth, running for the rocks as shouts of alarm erupted behind them. Energy weapons began firing, their beams slicing through the air. One of her team members, a young man named David, was hit in the back and fell without a sound. Kira wanted to go back for him, but she knew it was impossible. The mission was more important than any individual life, including her own. She kept running, bullets and energy blasts kicking up dirt around her feet. They reached the rocks and dove into a hidden tunnel that connected to the main cave system. The Vorath would not be able to follow. By the time they organized a proper search, Kira and her survivors would be kilometers away. She allowed herself a moment to catch her breath in the darkness of the tunnel. They had lost David and one other team member had been wounded, but the mission was complete. The modified drone was in the convoy, heading for the command center. In 48 hours, everything would change. The next 2 days were the longest of Kira's life. She forced herself to eat and sleep, knowing that she would need her strength when the moment came. But her mind would not stop racing through possibilities and contingencies, imagining everything that could go wrong. The council met in continuous session, finalizing plans for when the virus activated. Resistance cells across the continent were on alert, ready to strike at predetermined targets. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Medical supplies were organized. Everyone understood that this was the moment they had been preparing for, the chance they had been waiting for since the invasion began. Veth joined them in the command center, watching the Vorath communication channels for signs that the virus was working. He had become an accepted member of the resistance over the past months, respected for his knowledge and his commitment to their cause. Some still distrusted him, but Kira had defended him fiercely. Without him, none of this would be possible. "It has reached the command center," Veth reported on the morning of the second day. "I can see it spreading through their networks. They have no idea it is there." Kira leaned over his shoulder, watching the data streams that he was monitoring. To her untrained eye, it looked like random numbers and symbols, but Veth could read it like a book, seeing the virus's progress through the enemy systems. "How much longer?" she asked. "Perhaps 6 hours. It needs to reach the orbital platforms before activating. Otherwise, the fleet could still coordinate a response." 6 hours. 6 hours until everything they had worked for would be put to the test. 6 hours until the Vorath Empire faced a challenge it had never imagined. Kira used the time to make final preparations. She briefed the commanders who would lead the various assault teams. She reviewed the communication protocols one last time. She checked and rechecked the timing of each operation, ensuring that every piece would fall into place when the chaos began. And then finally it happened. The virus activated at precisely 14:37 local time. One moment, the Vorath military network was functioning normally. The next, it was tearing itself apart. Kira watched through intercepted communications as the enemy descended into madness. Units received contradictory orders. Ships changed course randomly. Defense systems targeted friendly forces. Commanders screamed for explanations that no one could provide. "Now," she said into the resistance-wide communicator, "all units execute." Across the continent, the resistance struck. The first week of the counteroffensive exceeded all of Kira's expectations. With the Vorath command structure in disarray, resistance forces achieved victories that would have been impossible just days before. They captured supply depots, destroyed communication towers, and liberated entire towns from enemy control. The Vorath tried to adapt. They attempted to isolate infected systems, to purge the virus from their networks. But Kira had anticipated this. The virus had been designed to hide in backup systems, to reinfect any network that connected to the compromised infrastructure. Every time the Vorath thought they had contained it, it spread again. More importantly, the chaos had shattered the psychological foundation of the occupation. The Vorath had always projected an image of invincibility, of overwhelming power that could not be challenged. Now they were seen to be vulnerable. Their soldiers hesitated, unsure if orders were real or corrupted. Their commanders questioned each other, wondering who might be compromised. The human population, which had been suppressed and defeated for a decade, began to rise. Not just the organized resistance, but ordinary people who had been waiting for a sign that resistance was possible. Factory workers sabotaged production. Communication operators leaked information. Local officials looked the other way as resistance fighters moved through their territories. Kira coordinated it all from the mountain base, sleeping only a few hours each night, her mind constantly working through the next moves in a chess game that spanned an entire continent. She had always been able to see patterns others missed, to anticipate consequences several steps ahead. Now that ability was being put to its ultimate test. The Vorath are pulling back from the eastern settlements, General Reed reported during one of their strategy sessions. They are concentrating their forces around the major cities and the spaceport. As I expected, Kira said, studying the tactical display. They are trying to establish a defensible perimeter while they repair their command systems. They are hopping to wait out the virus. Can they? Commander Chen asked. Eventually, yes. The virus is not permanent. Given enough time, they will be able to rebuild isolated networks, create new command structures, restore their coordination. Kira looked up from the display. That is why we cannot give them that time. We need to keep the pressure on, force them to react instead of plan. She outlined her strategy for the next phase of operations. Instead of direct assaults on the concentrated enemy forces, they would focus on disrupting supply lines, intercepting reinforcements, and preventing the Vorath from establishing the stable conditions they needed to recover. It was a strategy of constant harassment, of death by 1,000 cuts. The council approved her plan, as they always did. Some of them had initially resented taking orders from someone so young, someone who had never held an official rank or commanded troops in conventional warfare. But the results spoke for themselves. Under Kira's strategic guidance, the resistance had achieved more in 2 weeks than in the previous 10 years. But not everyone was satisfied with the pace of progress. A faction within the resistance, led by a former militia captain named Brennan, argued for more aggressive action. They wanted to launch a direct assault on the capital city, to try to capture the Vorath high command while they were still disorganized. It would be a bold stroke, potentially ending the occupation in one decisive battle. We have them on their heels, Brennan argued in an emergency council meeting. If we wait, we give them time to recover. We need to finish this now while we have the advantage. And lose everything we have gained, Kira responded sharply. The capital is still heavily defended. Even with their command systems compromised, the Vorath outnumber us 10-1. A direct assault would be a massacre. So we just keep fighting forever, hit and run forever. People are dying every day. We need to end this. We will end it, Kira said, her voice calm despite the anger in Brennan's tone. But not through recklessness. We end it by being smarter than them, more patient than them, more adaptable than them. That is how humans have always won against stronger enemies, not through direct confrontation but through strategy. The council ultimately sided with Kira, but the disagreement left a bitter taste. She understood Brennan's frustration. The desire for a quick end, for decisive action, was natural, but war was not about desire. It was about reality. And the reality was that they were not yet strong enough for the kind of victory Brennan wanted. The weeks that followed were grueling. The Vorath, realizing that they could not quickly restore their systems, began adapting to the new reality. They established isolated command cells, communicating through physical couriers instead of electronic networks. They deployed their troops in smaller, more independent units that could operate without central coordination. It made them less efficient, but also harder to predict. Kira had to constantly adjust her tactics, finding new weaknesses to exploit as old ones were closed. She spent hours poring over intelligence reports, looking for patterns in the enemy's behavior, trying to stay one step ahead. Veth was her constant companion during these sessions. His knowledge of Vorath culture and psychology helped her understand decisions that might otherwise seem irrational. They are afraid, he told her one night, as they studied reports of increasingly brutal Vorath reprisals against suspected resistance supporters. Fear makes them violent. It is a weakness their commanders cannot control. It is making our people afraid too, Kira admitted. The reprisals are turning some communities against us. They blame us for bringing Vorath anger down on them. Then we must show them that we can protect them, that supporting the resistance leads to safety, not danger. Kira nodded slowly. An idea was forming in her mind, a way to turn the Vorath's own tactics against them. We cannot protect everyone at once, but we can protect some, and we can make it very costly for the Vorath to attack those we protect. She developed a new strategy, establishing what she called protected zones, areas where the resistance would concentrate enough forces to credibly defend the civilian population. These zones became symbols of defiance, proof that the Vorath could not strike with impunity. People from surrounding areas began migrating to them, swelling their populations and their defensive capabilities. The Vorath tried to crush these zones, launching massive attacks against several of them. But Kira had prepared for this too. She had established elaborate early warning systems and evacuation routes. When the Vorath arrived with overwhelming force, they found empty buildings and booby-trapped streets. The population had melted away into the hills, only to return when the enemy withdrew. Each failed attack cost the Vorath troops, equipment, and most importantly, credibility. Their claim to absolute control became increasingly hollow. More and more people began to believe that the resistance could actually win. 3 months after the virus attack, Kira received a communication that changed everything. It came through channels that she had not known existed, encrypted with codes that she had never seen, but Veth recognized them immediately. "This is a diplomatic communication," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "From the Vorath High Council itself." Kira read the message with disbelief. The Vorath Empire was requesting negotiations, not with the remnants of humanity's official governments which they had destroyed, but with her, with the orphan girl who had become the strategic mastermind behind their defeat. It could be a trap, General Reed warned when she shared the news with the council. It could be, Kira agreed, but it could also be genuine. We have hurt them badly. Their occupation of this world is becoming more costly than the benefits they gain from it. There are voices within their empire calling for withdrawal. "How do you know that?" Commander Chen asked. Kira glanced at Veth. "I have been studying them for a long time. I understand how they think, what motivates them. They are not a unified force. There are factions, disagreements, competing interests. We have been exploiting those divisions from the beginning." She looked around the table at the faces of people who had fought and sacrificed for so long. "I think we should respond. Not because I trust them, but because negotiation is another form of warfare. And it is a form where we have advantages they do not expect." The negotiations took place on a neutral ground that Kira had chosen carefully. A plateau in the mountains, far from any settlement, surrounded by terrain that gave her forces every advantage if things went wrong. She had prepared extensively, studying every possible angle, every argument the Vorath might make, every concession she might be able to extract. The Vorath delegation arrived in a single transport, as agreed. There were 5 of them, led by a high-ranking official named Thuron who represented one of the more moderate factions in their government. Kira had researched him thoroughly. He was pragmatic, results-oriented, more concerned with the Empire's long-term stability than with ideology or honor. She met him in a simple tent, accompanied only by Veth and General Reed. The presence of a Vorath among her advisors clearly surprised Thuron, though he hid it well. "You are younger than I expected," Thuron said, studying her with his 4 eyes. "Our reports suggested someone more, experienced." "Experience is not the same as age," Kira replied calmly. "I have been fighting your empire since I was 12 years old. That is enough experience for anyone." Thuron made a gesture that might have been acknowledgement. You have done impressive things. The virus attack alone would have earned you recognition among our strategists, but you must understand that we cannot simply withdraw because of one setback, however significant. One setback, Kira leaned forward. Your occupation has lost 30% of its controlled territory in 3 months. Your supply lines are under constant attack. Your soldiers are afraid to patrol without armor support. And the virus is still active, reinfecting your systems every time you connect them to the broader network. This is not a setback. This is a defeat in progress. We can send more troops, Thuron said, but his voice lacked conviction. You could, Kira agreed. But at what cost? You have other frontiers to defend, other rebellions to suppress. The resources you spend here are resources you cannot spend elsewhere. And every month this continues, more of your soldiers die. More of your equipment is destroyed. More of your commanders question whether this world is worth the price. She had prepared for this moment for months, assembling data on Voreth military deployments across their empire, understanding the pressures they faced on multiple fronts. The Voreth were powerful, but they were not infinite. Their empire was stretched thin, and humanity's world was becoming an expensive distraction. What do you want? Thuron asked finally. Freedom, Kira said simply. Complete withdrawal of all Voreth forces from our world. Recognition of human sovereignty. No reparations, no conditions, no face-saving arrangements. You leave and you do not come back. That is impossible. Our honor would not permit such a concession. Your honor, Kira's voice turned cold. You invaded our world without warning, killed millions of civilians, destroyed cities that had stood for centuries. Do not speak to me of honor. She stood up, her presence suddenly commanding despite her small stature. Here is what I am offering. If you withdraw peacefully, we will not pursue you. We will not attack your ships as they leave. We will allow your soldiers to return home alive. And we will not share the virus technology with the other races you have conquered. Thuron's eyes widened. This was a threat he had not anticipated. The virus that had crippled their forces on one world could potentially spread to their entire empire, igniting rebellions on 1,000 planets. You are bluffing, he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Perhaps, but can you afford to take that chance? Can your empire survive if this virus spreads to every world you control? Kira sat back down, her expression calm. We both know the answer. The question is whether you are wise enough to accept it. The negotiations continued for 3 more days. Thuron argued, threatened, and bargained. Kira countered every point with logic, evidence, and the quiet certainty of someone who understood the strategic reality better than her opponent. She made small concessions when appropriate, holding firm on the essential demands. In the end, Thuron agreed, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. The Voreth Empire would withdraw from the human world within 6 months. Their forces would leave in stages, supervised by observers from both sides. In return, humanity would not share the virus technology with other subject races. It was not a perfect agreement. Many in the resistance wanted revenge, wanted the Voreth to pay for the suffering they had caused. But Kira understood that revenge was a luxury they could not afford. What mattered was survival, freedom, the chance to rebuild without the constant threat of extinction. The withdrawal began 3 weeks later. Kira watched from the same plateau where the negotiations had taken place as the first Voreth ships lifted off from the surface. It was strange, seeing the enemy depart after so many years of fighting. Strange, but deeply satisfying. Veth stood beside her, his 4 eyes reflecting the lights of the departing ships. You have accomplished something unprecedented, he said quietly. No race has ever forced the Empire to withdraw through negotiation. They will remember this. They will study your tactics, your strategies, trying to understand how you did it. Good, Kira said. Let them study. Let them understand that humans are not easy prey, that we can adapt, learn, overcome any challenge. Maybe that understanding will prevent future wars. Or maybe it will make them more determined to destroy you before you become a greater threat. Kira nodded, acknowledging the possibility. Then we will have to be ready for that too. We have proven that we can survive even against overwhelming odds. Whatever comes next, we will face it the same way. The months that followed were difficult in different ways. Rebuilding after a decade of occupation required enormous effort. Cities had to be restored, systems reorganized, wounds healed. Kira found herself in an unfamiliar role, not as a strategist of war but as a leader of peace. She established a new government based on the principles that had made the resistance successful: adaptability, cooperation, and respect for individual initiative. She created institutions that could prevent the kind of centralized vulnerability that had made humanity easy prey for the initial invasion. And she ensured that the lessons learned during the war would not be forgotten. The virus technology was not destroyed, but it was carefully guarded, a deterrent against future aggression, a reminder that humanity could not be safely attacked. Other races began reaching out, curious about the species that had defeated the mighty Vorath. Alliances were formed, trade relationships established. The galaxy began to see humans differently, not as victims but as potential partners. 10 years after the liberation, Kira stood at a memorial in what had once been New Geneva. The city had been rebuilt, not exactly as it was before, but with new strength and purpose. The memorial honored all those who had died in the invasion and the resistance, including her parents. She placed flowers at the base of the monument, as she did every year on this date. Around her, children played in the nearby park, too young to remember the war, knowing only the peace that had followed. This was what she had fought for. This was what all the strategy and sacrifice had achieved. "Do you ever regret it?" a voice asked. She turned to find General Reed, old now and retired but still sharp-eyed and straight-backed. "The decisions you made, the lives you could not save." Kira considered the question seriously. "Every day," she admitted. "I remember every person who died under my command, every family destroyed, every choice that cost lives. But I also remember what we were fighting for, what we achieved. The children playing in that park exist because we did not give up." She looked at the names carved into the memorial, thousands of them, each one a story of courage and sacrifice. "My parents believed that understanding your enemy was the first step to defeating them. They were right, but I learned something else during the war. Understanding yourself is just as important. Knowing what you are willing to fight for, what you are willing to sacrifice, what kind of future you want to create." She turned to face the city, the children, the future that had been purchased with so much blood and brilliance. Humanity survived because we adapted, because we refused to accept that bigger and stronger meant invincible, because a 12-year-old orphan in a basement saw a pattern in old maps that no one else had noticed. That is who we are. That is why we will never be conquered. The sun was setting over the rebuilt city, painting the sky in colors of gold and red. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and Kira Vance, the orphan genius who had led a resistance, who had secured victory through strategy against tyranny, allowed herself to smile. The war was over, the future was beginning, and humanity, as always, was ready for whatever came next.